I was in I was in no, not 12th grade. I was in 8th grade when I did that. And it was surprising to me how everyone would come up and they had no idea what their money was spent on. They spent like a week or 2 weeks on their project just trying to figure it out because they had to practice with their family first. Okay, this is how you start a budget. Let's keep track of it. And even then, if it wasn't accurate, mine was like I was already done pretty much. And my group mates didn't have to do anything. So that's when I first realized that budgeting in the family wasn't a thing. Okay, we started. And basically, I don't know, we I don't know, this topic that we've had in mind, we kind of started with this because you sent remind me how did we get into this topic? You sent me a link to a podcast about this guy who does like social arbitrage or
Oh
he
yeah.
uses social media data. Okay, like where did that come from? What prompted that? And how did we get into into this deep a subject?
Well, I think it's important for people to recognize, and even as we are talking about it, it's important to live in the present, but with the future in mind. And part of that requires an understanding of financial literacy. I mean, I'm not sure how it is in the Philippines, but in the United States, I mean, there's so many people that get into debt for things that they shouldn't be doing, or they should. It's just really hard for self-control, for maybe affording X, Y, or Z, like trying to buy it even though you can't afford it. And that was just an interesting topic with this other guy using social arbitrage to be able to do investing. But I mean, that's not something that I would personally like kind of tell everybody, because that's like, to be honest, investing is difficult in that a lot of people think they know more than they really do, and then they actually lose money in the market. And part of that is just kind of recognizing how savings work, how interest works, and just that aspect of it. I mean, I'm not sure how it is for you, Chris, but like when I was growing up, money isn't something that we necessarily talk about. Even when I was going in college, it wasn't something that we talk about as like tuition is X amount, or how are you gonna like afford to go through university. And it was just kind of like a little bit taboo, and it kind of just hush hush, and you just kind of get through it like every semester. And thankfully I got a scholarship, but I'm just thinking like that would have been really difficult if I didn't have any of that. But
Right.
I mean, what's your financial knowledge, Chris, about like that?
I think the history, when I'm looking at it from my perspective, I really started talking about money when I was little. I would say we started budgeting, like family budgets was a thing. We would go
You
into,
guys did budgeting.
we
Wow.
would budget. Yeah, we would budget as
Your
family. So what
mom
we
was
would do,
like, oh, you guys were open with your finances. Like your mom was open with the
yeah,
finances. And, wow. How old were you, you said?
I was like the youngest that I've seen a spreadsheet, like an Excel spreadsheet with a budget, was 10 years old.
That's
That was the
crazy.
Yeah,
That's
so I thought that was a normal thing. I had no
wow.
idea that people don't practice it. And here's when I found out that it wasn't normal. So we did a presentation in school. They were asking us, okay, where do you spend your budget on? And everyone was like, okay, how do we start doing this? And at the top of my head, I'm like, okay, we're in a group. We started going in a group together, and basically all I did was I just got together and told everyone, we could just do my budget. I already have the numbers on the top of my head. I already know what we spend our money on. We just actually did it last week, and then we just list it down. And my group mates didn't have to do anything. All they had to do was draw it on a piece of paper or like a manila paper so that they could present it. And I presented it in front of the class. And I was in no, not 12th grade. I was in 8th grade when I did that. And it was surprising to me how everyone would come up and they had no idea what their money was spent on. They spent like a week or 2 weeks on their project just trying to figure it out because they had to practice with their family first. Okay, this is how you start a budget. Let's keep track of it. And even then, if it wasn't accurate, mine was like I was already done pretty much. And my group mates didn't have to do anything. So that's when I first realized that budgeting in the family wasn't a thing. And the other thing that I've learned pretty early on was the concept of saving. So I learned how I started learning to save in a bank, and I've actually invested. So the earliest that I started to invest in mutual funds was when I was 10 years old as well. So at 10 years old, I started my family got me enrolled in a corporation. And what this corporation does is they pull everyone's monies together. And with that money that's pulled together, they start investing it in different areas, like in real estate, or they give it out as loans to people. It's kind of functions like a bank, but the benefits are better in terms of like interest rate, and you don't get capital gains tax on those. And I just learned every week to save this amount of money. And I was also taught the principle of trying to save up for a mission. And that's where I really learned that you really had that money doesn't grow in trees, and that you had to work for it, but that it's also to save for a rainy day. I was lucky I never had to pull that money out. I invested that money in I invested that money in a business that our family was doing right before I left for my mission, or about the time I was serving a mission for the church. And honestly, that business is going like super well. COVID hit, and it was kind of resilient. And I know that that business has been doing pretty good. And my returns on it, I never asked the returns on it, because like it's still kind of like a taboo subject that it's not. But I don't see myself pulling my money out of that business, because I just see that it's been pretty decent. But from that experience, I also learned how you got to be very detailed in your finances, how you gotta have contracts and everything, because like we never really set up how much shares was mine. It was kind of like lent out as debt, and so that money is still there. But yeah.
Dang, that's so interesting. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, but you started investing in private equity at age 10. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, like some sort of private equity. And it
I mean, how
was
come you
like,
didn't invest, let's say, in a stock, or how is that? How is the investing world in the Philippines? Because
right.
I mean, I would think it's harder to invest in a private company rather than in some sort of stock or in some sort of bonds.
So, like, if we're talking about real sense in like securing your returns, it is harder to invest in private equity, because what I did was they were asking for money, and because I wasn't the legal age, so my mom was the one who handled it, and I just basically like said, "Okay, I don't mind," and she just gave the money. The setting up of the contracts, the setting up of the agreements, and the setting up of the terms for everything, and to guarantee your returns and to make sure that you have a stake in ownership, that was never done. But if you did that thorough process to make sure that you have a proper ROI, that is going to be much harder than investing in stocks. And honestly, stocks are not a big thing in the Philippines. I think stocks started to blow up after COVID, when people saw their savings drop and everything just become more expensive, and people started to hear about the stock market. I never invested in Philippine stocks until I was in college, because I didn't really know that there was such a thing. I never knew that there was such a thing.
That's insane.
And yeah, and I only really started investing in stocks like my first year in college. I don't know if you remember this. You were the one who introduced it to me. You told me
Hmm.
to try this app and to
Which
try and
app was it?
invest.
Was that Robinhood or Webull?
That was Robinhood, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just started putting my money in Tesla. I was like, okay, Tesla's a good company, and
Oh wow.
this was right before the crash in 2022, where everything went down, and I
Uh-huh.
invested in Bitcoin, and I lost. I lost, like, during that time, I lost a lot of money, and
Did you
then
sell
like
it off?
I sold it off. Yeah, I sold it off.
No
That's the thing,
way.
because again,
My
I
goodness. Just imagine that's 5x already.
right. No, it's
Wow.
probably more, because if I kept it at the dip and if I bought during its lowest point, so Bitcoin right now is like
It's like 100K or
97.
so. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
And so if I bought it at the dip, that would have been like 30, 40K or something. Like, yeah, that would have been
Dang.
40K. And so I would have had a huge return on that if I just bought during the dip. And I'm just so glad I learned that in my earlier years. Imagine if I had more money saved up and I lost more money doing it. I'm just so glad that I was so much younger, where that money doesn't mean as much to me. I'm not in some financial crisis. I don't have a commitment to buy a house or anything. And so yeah, it's good to make these mistakes while you're young. It was
Yeah.
good because they don't hurt you as much.
So I guess the most important lesson is like to kind of start young, like start as early as you can. I,
Right.
because like you're bound to make mistakes. I like this quote. I don't remember who exactly said it, but it was like, in terms of investments, the best day to invest was yesterday. The second best day is today. And so like once you learn about it and understand like there are risks. I mean, it is an investment, it's not a guarantee. In the finance world, that word guarantee is like, what is it? It's a forbidden word. It's
Mm,
taboo. You don't really say that because I mean there's so much legal aspects that comes into it.
all right.
But I mean, when one invests in the market as a whole, you're practically saying that the world is gonna get better through time. Um, and for me personally, like once I understood about investing, I put more money, like more in ETFs, or
Mhm.
like index funds. But I want to kind of talk about more into like the minutia for like the individual person.
Right.
So, I mean, I think we should talk about savings first. And
Mm.
you were mentioning about like putting a budget. How did the budget look like in terms of a percentage of the take home pay that your family was making? Like, what was the percentages on how that looked?
Okay. So what that looked like on my end was in our budget, there was the income. There was tithing, obviously, because in our church, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have like a commandment where you have to pay 10% of your tithing to the church, and that shows your faithfulness to the Lord. And so 10% was automatically deducted. Then came taxes. And after that was fast offering, and then after that was everything else that you had to pay. Expenses were about 50, I would say 60%. And then my mother had savings, like she would deduct savings first, and then she would work on her retirement, and then for other vacations. So like 20% was savings and retirement, and then the other 20% was going to be for anything we wanted to do. If we wanted to go out, if we wanted to have fun, if there's something that we wanted to do together, that was what that money was for. And that was really the core of how we did our budget. And it was I've seen it so many times. Like, the one thing that people wouldn't believe me is that they don't believe that I knew what it was. It's just like it's kind of frustrating to me. Like, even as I'm older, even when people are at an older age, like in their late 20s, they still don't know how to budget. They still don't know how to work an Excel spreadsheet, and it's kind of new to them. I've seen people in their 40s who are Filipino, and they've never touched the budget, and they spend
Well,
so much more.
I
Right.
want to interject because I mean, I wouldn't look down on anybody that doesn't know how to use an Excel workbook or do Excel, like do a budget in terms of like digital. But I think there needs to be an understanding on that. There's like maybe three buckets that one needs to do, right? Which is like once they get their income, there's going to be a savings bucket, an investment bucket, and then a a fun bucket, I guess. I mean,
Right.
because you can't just live off like rice and beans, like. And so,
No.
I mean, like you were mentioning about your mom was making maybe like 20% for savings or like retirement,
Right.
things like that. And I mean, it's not, I mean, this topic is actually very important. However, it's also very taboo or kind of looked down on, or maybe even
Mm.
there's just a negative social stigma with it. Almost as if maybe as you're talking about finances, it makes you a greedy person. And I don't like that's an oversimplification, but when I was growing up, there was almost like a talk of like you don't talk about finances like that because
Mhm.
almost as if showing your ambition to have money is a negative trait to have. And so like that's why I tried to learn more about the finances. And sorry, it's Reagan. And there's an understanding that like like money is important because it allows you to do X, Y, and Z. And so there needs to be a savings component to it. There's going to be like an investment component.
Right.
And so with that said, like part of the problem in the United States that I've read on is that about like there's so many people that have car loans, for example. The average
Mhm.
car loan in the United States is about $700. So imagine every month you have to account for your expenses. And part of that is the 700 car loan, as well as your housing, as well as food, groceries, and insurance, things like that. And it adds up. But something that helped me being an immigrant was just how if like you got to make sure that you can actually afford certain things. And so
Right.
part of that is like if you're making, let's say, $2,000 or $3,000 a month, and like
Right.
out of that 3,000, let's say 500 goes to taxes. So really, you're getting like 2,500, and out of
Right.
2,500, let's say you have the average car loan of 700, then you have 1,800, and then how about food, groceries and things like that? Maybe that's another extra 800. And
Mhm.
then now you have 1,000, and then out of that 1,000 there's like insurance, other necessary expenses that you might have to do, let's say whatever miscellaneous, let's say like 300-400. So
Right.
then you have like 600 left over. Out of that 600, let's say 200 can go to your fund money, you can do whatever, and
Right.
then 400 can go towards an investment, like in your investment bucket. And so like it's really basic to kind of think about it that way, but it's not as intuitive as most people think, because in the real world, once you actually get that money, it's kind of hard to have that self-control, especially for those that are having their first jobs. I remember in my high
Mhm.
school, to graduate, we were the first students in 2015 to get this, where you need to pass your finance class, and it's like everybody passes this class. But I remember taking that class, and it was actually really important because it was an initiative, because a lot of high school students, once they graduate, they get into a lot of bad financial decisions, and it's hard to get out of.
Wait, wait,
So
wait. Let me
there's
let me let me
yeah
just clarify. Your high school, the school you went to, taught finances to students.
yes, I think there's a lot of fault finding, where like financial literacy, there's not enough of it. Schools need to teach it. Schools
Mhm.
do teach it. I
Yeah.
just like how we are taught algebra, like basic algebra. We're taught like basic maths, and some people are still not able to do it. It's not. I don't think at this point in time, with the technology as well as like the more free time we have now, it's not a fault of the school system per se, but it's rather
Mhm.
just people not caring about it, like people choosing not to care about it. And it could
Right.
be because it's hard, or like it's a hard topic to talk about. It's a hard topic, to bring up with family and friends.
Mhm.
But you got to you have to be accountable. You have to be responsible in whatever time period we are. And so in my class, like we were taught these things, like really, really basic stuff. I was not taught taxes, but we were just taught like the basic algebra with how money works. And it's
Yeah.
very, as you think about it, like very basic, but in practice it becomes difficult, because let's
Mhm.
say you got your first job, you're supposed to do this, but you know what? The PS5 just came out. Like the PS5 is going for let's say $600. You could probably go without food, or you can just get a credit card. That's one of those issues as well, or get loans. Part of the problem is a lot of Americans have a lot of credit card debt, And
Right.
so, there's they're using money that they technically did not have, and now they have to pay back that money with interest. Now that becomes a really difficult thing to do because the interest rates is, let's say, 30%, 27, 30%.
Right.
And
That's just
obviously
standard.
that adds up. And so
Right.
it's hard to get out. Like, you're digging a hole for yourself. But for the people that are starting off, like, with a clean slate, I mean, it's just basic understanding of only buy things that you can afford. One of my mottos is use your credit card like a debit card. And I think we should also talk about the differences between the two. Chris, can you
Mhm.
explain what the difference between a credit card and a debit card is?
Right. So the difference basically within a credit and a debit. So credit card is basically anything you put in it is money that you owe, and banks are going to charge you for that. And debit card is basically it's money that you have. So for a debit card, before you could spend anything, you need to have money on it. If you want to buy something that's worth $500 after taxes, then you need to make sure that you have at least $500 cash in that debit card. Whereas for a credit card, right, like as long as you can spend an insane amount of money, but you have an obligation then to the bank to pay those back. And they also add up interest because interest is like their profit. It's how much money they're getting for how much money they are lending you over a period of time. It's to minimize their risk from a bank perspective. But I think that's the very basic rundown of what a credit and debit card is. And like I don't know how other people use this, but I love using credit cards. So for me, like the way that I would use a credit card, and I have two credit cards on me right now. The reasons I like credit cards is because number one, it helps build up your credit score. Number two, it helps you loan money, and there are some points and advantages to it. Like they're just 3%, so it's like getting a 3% discount. And what I always do with it is like I like the delayed payments. So in the Philippines, there is a bank where you could get 5% return annually, and it's compounded daily. And so what I would do is I would spend money using the credit card, and then I'd save up, and I'd let interest accumulate in the bank, and when it's time to pay the credit card, I pay all my expenses, and then I would have gotten that interest. I would have gotten that gain from the bank, which is for me like that's a very good thing. Like that's something that I really like to have. It's an advantage that I I very much enjoy. If you get into very deep financial literacy, you realize that the longer you can delay payments with very little risk, the better off you are. Which Okay, let me try and interject with some of the things that in the Philippines. Like, let me try and respond to like some of the other things that you've mentioned. Like, first of the things that you've mentioned is you've mentioned that it's a taboo subject because people think that financial literacy, like when you talk about it, it's boasting. And let me make it clear, like for people who think that I'm boasting because I started learning a budget when I was young, I still have made so many financial mistakes. But if we don't talk about it, you can't really improve. There's a scripture in the Bible that people misinterpret, and people say that the love for money is evil, and and people just interject that as money is equal to evil doings or is something that is evil. People often forget that money is a tool so that you can use to be free, so that you could use to spend on comforts and spend on things that will basically benefit you and your loved ones. It is not necessarily an evil thing. The love for it, meaning if you keep chasing it, that you're willing to do anything, even things that are illegal, that is what makes it evil. And the other thing is like when you mentioned that money being taught in the school system, I think I think there are a lot of critics out there who will say that financial literacy is not taught in the school system. But the real problem is it's not because if it's taught in the financial school system, it's because people at the home don't really learn how to do it. People expect the school system to teach everything that their kids should know. No, the school system is only there to kind of support you and to kind of help you, but it's not going to teach everything that your kids need to learn. Most of that learning needs to come in the home. And so parents really need to understand that if you want your kids to be financially literate, you also need to learn to be financially literate. You need to do the extra work, and you cannot afford to be ignorant when it comes to your finances right now, especially when there are a lot of resources online that will allow you to become better and to improve. And the other one is that basically, you know, one of the things that I've seen with credit card debt in the Philippines, there's a lot of people who really are good with managing their finances. I've never heard of people become financially burdened because of credit cards. I've seen most people use debit cards all the time. They don't use the credit card advantage, but they would use this other thing where they would borrow money from other people. Like they would go to stores and the term is palista, meaning they would list down their names and how much they would owe. And for me, there's another financial advantage to that, but I won't go into that. But the thing that I would highly encourage people first is to just get out of debt, to get out of debt first. Know the things that you do need. You talked about car loans in the US, and I would actually argue that people in the US would need cars more because your public transportation system is not really that efficient than compared to having a car, and you're saving so much time. But in the Philippines, the thing that I would argue is like the public transportation system is so much more efficient in the Philippines compared to that of the States, when you compare distance wise and destination wise and the amount of time it gets there, it's so much more efficient, it's so much more cheaper, and yet here you are buying a car because you want to impress other people. I think that that is a very kind of wrong kind of a mindset. I think you really need to learn. I mean, by all means, if you need the car and if you have a family that really needs to have that car, like I know some people who, they have large families and they want to transport all people together, especially when they're going to church and going to school, then that's all and well. But you really need to sit down and know your finances. You need to sit down and know what all of this does for you. Like, okay, so I keep like ranting on here. Like, what is like? That's the thing. It's so broad. Like the financial system and the financial world is so broad. It's what's the word? Not captivating. It's surprising to me that no one knows about this and that no one talks about it. I think
Oh,
that's the first problem with it.
well,
Is
I
that
think that's. I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I think what's happening is the people that want to know have already looked and are knowing. I think that's why there's an explosion of finance gurus, finance
mm,
YouTubers regarding credit cards, regarding finance. That's not the issue. The issue is just the people as a broader group just don't know. Like, what about the people that are actively trying to not know? Well, it's gonna bite them. Part of that, and you were even talking about it with the car loan stuff. I think we should also just kind of step back, and this is specifically in the United States. I have a firm belief that, as a general rule, if you are in the United States and you don't eventually get a retirement, like you're not a millionaire by the time you retire, or maybe not even a millionaire, but you'll be comfortable. You'll have a good retirement. That is purely your fault. It's a strong stance, but it's because there's so many opportunities in the United States to make money or to save. There's so many resources to know more about the budgets, all those things. And I think, especially like, there's so many bad decisions that you can be making every day, like maybe spending $15-$20 a day for coffee, or things like
mm,
little things like that adds up. And I mean, it's almost like you deserve what you're gonna get because you've increased your present time but then like for your future benefit. And like you were talking about the car stuff, it's like, well, there are vehicles that aren't as maybe modern, but there are still vehicles that you could probably afford for your family, for a big family, or yourself, that doesn't require you to be going in $700 a month in like like having that debt in your name. There's cars, like, rather than getting a $40,000 car, you can get a $10,000 one. I mean, there's so many other ways to go about it that I think at this point in time, especially with the newer generation, there's no excuse. I think also if one looks for an excuse, it's just a bad thing for your mental, because you're like looking for somebody else to blame. And then this is kind of, we were talking about school, now it makes me think about how like student loans work, and then all of a sudden maybe like the United States are gonna try to get student loans to be forgiven, even though being able to get those loans easier in the first place is a blessing. I mean, I'm sure there's I'm not sure how it is in the Philippines. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it easy to get loans to go to school in the Philippines? Are you able to do that, or do you have to save up first?
So when we're talking about loans, are we talking about
Student
like
loans.
college loans, like
Yes,
student
college.
loans? Okay. So in the Philippines, um, I don't think it's a thing. I've known people pay their tuition up front. And I remember there was this one bank who tried to advertise 0% interest loans on education. And I think they had so many things hidden between the lines. Like, what was the term? Like, the fine print. They had so much stuff in the fine print that
Mhm.
people recognize, and people are very sensitive. Yeah, one thing I gotta give kudos to the Filipinos: they do not like being taken advantage of, especially when it comes to finances. And so, especially when it comes to finances, they are very good at spotting these things, the things that would basically ensnare you, and they're very good at sensing it from corporates and from banks basically. And so I think they discontinued the program of 0% interest on those loans, because I think there was like a hidden like term about it, like, oh, you got to start paying this much and that, and which for me is kind of a good thing. But there are other things where I think it's not so financially sound. Like financial wise, I think Filipinos, they're good at detecting scams, and they're very good at detecting they're good at detecting BS. Like it can't be all that good.
Mhm.
And they make sense of it. They know how to utilize and move their way around it. They're more sensitive when it comes to finances, basically, which is a great thing.
Yeah. I mean, then why do you think, like as we're talking about it, right? Why do you think the Philippines as a country isn't, you know, spearheading like in the economic development of Asian countries, or why is it not? From what I've seen, from what I'm understanding, is just it's not up there when you think about economics, or it's not up there in terms of just the finances, or it's not a powerhouse like
Right.
China or even like Japan or Korea. Like there's not a level of prestige when we talk about the Philippines as a economic nation. I mean,
Right.
when I say the Philippines, I think more of
Third
tourism,
world
if
country.
anything. Well, I didn't say that, but I think about tourism and potentially like a bunch of islands, beaches. But all those things you were talking about, being able to like, there should be smarter with their money, not being able to be scammed, things like that. I don't really think about it
Hmm.
in the economic terms. Why do you think that is, that the Philippines has stagnated
So
economically?
if you look at economic wise, there is a lot of different factors that play into it, and one of the things that you really have to understand with countries like these is that when you say a third world country, it doesn't mean that everyone's poor. What I think it means with the third world country is that the gap between the higher than average income and the gap between the lower than average income is just much wider.
Oh wait,
You,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
I need to interject here because I need to say that, like, so the reason why there's a differentiation between first world country and third world or even second world, it really comes down because of the United States and Russia. So when they were having the Cold War, it is
right.
becoming like it's like a marketing thing with with the United States and Russia. So the United States is a first world country, so it's like number one, while
Mm,
Russia is a second world country. And really, the idea is like everyone else that's not a big player, because at this time, nukes was the currency of the world, of global power. And so, I mean, there's only the United States and Russia. So those two are like for sure first world, second world, and everyone else without nukes, without that currency that you can really apply it to, is a third world. And it was only then after the Cold War, then there's been like a little bit of a understanding of what that is. I mean, you never hear a second world country say that they are a second world country.
Yeah, right.
Everybody's a third world country unless you're the United States or Europe, it seems.
Is that actually the thing? Is that really the history of it?
Oh yeah, it is. Everybody's a third world country supposedly because of that. But
Okay.
like it's just a term. It's just like a marketing term during that war, during that time. But then it changed now because the Cold War has ended.
Right. And so that term just kind of like stuck.
But
That was the
because
term.
so now you're mentioning about the reason why is because like there's a huge shift between the top 1% maybe compared to like the lower end economically in the Philippines. But you know what? As you say that, it makes me think. You know which one has the largest disparity? Actually,
Which
is the United States of America.
What the heck?
Just
No
by
way.
thinking about it, because the United States of America has the most billionaires. Elon Musk being one of them, and at one point he was $400 billion. So he's at the very top, and you can imagine somebody with like a lot of loans or even like have no money. So the disparity is $0 compared to 400 billion. And so when you compare that to maybe somebody in the Philippines who has $0 to, let's say, like 10 billion, I mean, it's still a huge disparity, but by absolute measurement, the United States then has the biggest varied of change of different people of economic like backgrounds.
No, not by variance, like not by the amount of gap. I think like more in the United States, you have more people like in the middle. Like if you look at the disparity, that disparity is much wider, but you have more people in the average, like kind of a bracket, and so it kind of looks like a hill, like in the middle. Whereas the Philippines is kind of like the reverse of that. You have a lot of people who are on the poor side, and then you don't have a lot of people in the middle ground, and then you have a lot of people, like you have some more people like on the richer side or in the higher income level. Like there's not much people in the middle. I that was the comparison that I used to make, and I want to argue like right now that is kind of growing smaller. Like the mound on the poor side is starting to get smaller and smaller, and that gap, that little hole that you see in the middle, is starting to get smaller and smaller as well, because you have more people who are finding better decent jobs, who have more sources of income, especially with home-based work. And then it just seems to me like the people that I see here are pretty much more resilient, and they're getting more financially wise. Like I would argue that we've had more financially literate people today than we've had 20 years ago, and that more people are aware of their finances and have a budget today than they did several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought that third world, if anything, was going to be a definition regarding the like the average person in comparison to everybody else. I remember, I think, reading something along the lines of, like in the United States, let's say the average median salary is around like 40K, let's say, while another country, when you compare it, is like maybe in the Philippines, their average salary, like per year, would be like $5,000 to $10,000, and so that's like. But at the same time, what can you do with that? Because then even in another country, maybe their monthly income would be like $100. So then really their yearly would be 1,200. And so like there's that huge gap. And so for me, having this understanding of like really better understanding on the differences on how the countries are, helps me because it kind of helps me recognize my blessings. The United States being the greatest economic powerhouse, and then as we have things to address for sure, but all things considering, the United States is doing pretty well for the average person. And obviously, it could always improve, but I mean, and with that comes so many more opportunities. There's a reason why there's so many more businesses being created in the United States, and a lot more wealth creation has been made here. Um, so how do you think government kind of plays into the Philippines in terms of its economic power?
Wait, what do you mean by like how the government plays into economic power? Like,
Well, such as the government. I'm not exactly sure how it is in the Philippines, but with states or like provinces, uh, is it running at a very capitalistic way, or is it more socialist? Um, because the United
I,
States, especially with the new president Donald J. Trump, it seems to be
mm,
that there's a heightened awareness of things will probably get better, and so the stocks in turn like are a reflection of that, as well as just people's general optimism for this new presidency.
hmm. Okay. So keeping that in mind, so I would say like in the Philippines, we are definitely a capitalist country, and we get that in a third world country there's going to be corruption that's going to abide. Taking aside those factors, I would argue that most of the taxes that are spent, like first and foremost of all, the strong enforcement of taxes is not as strong as that in the US. I am not telling Filipinos that you should skip on your taxes, and I'm not encouraging like any tax evasion behavior. I'm just saying that it's not as strict as in the US, where you have an IRS government who is hounding everyone, is keeping track and tracking all their finances. In the Philippines, the way that I would see it is that where taxpayer money is spent, I would argue that a lot of the economic development is going a little more towards the central capital, like like in Manila and the surrounding areas, because that's where most of the population of the Philippines really is, and that's where most of the economic growth of the Philippines happens. So that's one thing that I think that the Philippines has a lot of potential for. Like Manila and the area surrounding it is such a small area compared to everywhere else in the Philippines. We're not really utilizing all the other lands and all the other places as well. There are places that are going closer to Manila in terms of development, but not all these places have it as developed as Manila yet. And the other thing that I would consider, especially in terms of government plays in economics, I would argue that there's a lot of people who there's a lot of government programs that will help subsidize care and that are aimed at giving away money to people. But the thing that I don't like about it is that you're taxing everyone, especially people who are working hard, and you're giving it to people who barely do anything. I think that's the standard that I've seen. I gotta do a little more research on it, but from what I've heard, this is where it was going basically. I'm not even sure if that answers your question, right?
Well, not really. But I mean, let's go back to the financial literacy part. What would you say is a good baseline on what one should do with once they get their money?
So, in my religion, in my church, like basically what you do is once you receive your income, your taxes are paid, your taxes and your benefits, like your government subsidized benefits, are already deducted from your income. First, pay your tithing, pay 10% of your, not your net income, but of your gross income. So the money that you receive, pay 10% from that. And then you have money set aside for fast offering, which is basically charity. And then what I would do with my money is I try and spend 40% of it on expenses, 30% on investing and in savings, money that I will not touch for another 10, 20 years or so. and then the rest of the 30% is going to like other projects as well. Like I if I need to buy a new laptop, if I need to buy new appliances, if I need to make repairs, like that is my emergency money, and that's where I'm going to spend it at. And it's going to be very different for different people, but that's how I would spend my income and my salary. And no one even knows what my salary is. Like when people ask me, okay, how much is your salary? I would tell them it's enough to cover like my expenses. It's like to cover my basic living expenses. Like I
Mm.
don't tell them like how much the figure is, because I don't want people getting the idea like, oh, this Chris, he has money. You can start asking him, because like even in my broke college years, like when I was studying in Hawaii and I barely had money, people kept asking me for money. I do
Dang.
not want to
Yeah,
go
you're
into
in the
what it's like.
U.S. You have a lot.
Yeah,
That's the understanding.
I was like, what people don't understand is like how hard it is to get there. I'm like, Chris, you're so lucky. I'm like, lucky? Like I had to do fairly well in school. I had to make sure that we had our finances in check, and then when I got to school, I had to make sure that I did well so that I didn't flunk out of the program that was being subsidized. Now, given it was very privileged to have such programs available to me, but I really don't think that people should just consider it like, luck. People are lucky is because they were ready for the opportunity when it was about to meet them. Like there's no such thing as luck. It's just basically hard work that's being
Oh,
rewarded with such an opportunity that
I
just came.
I actually have to disagree with that. I mean,
No, okay.
but before I go with that, I think like what I mentioned with my question earlier, like what would one do as a really basic rule of thumb? I think once you have your income, I mean, this is a given that if you already know your expenses, and this is, I guess, an example that I would do with the 3,000, let's say, and obviously change it. If you make, oh, here, let's say 1,000 as a really basic math. Let's say you make 1,000 a month, and so with that being said, you know that for that whole month, it would take, let's say, $600 that you would need, that would cover your housing, that would cover your
Right.
vehicles, that would cover groceries, and it could, whatever that number is. So you first account to be able to live. I think a lot of people might even go with, do savings first. I think take into account what you need to actually survive and live. So out of that 1,000, now you have 1,000 minus 600. Now you have 400. Out of that 400, you should go by percentages, which I think a golden rule, a golden percentile. If you can do this, then you should be golden for the rest of your life. Once you retire in like 30, 40 years, is 25%. So out of that 1,000, multiply, like what is 25% of 1,000? That's 250. That should go to your savings/investment. And then from there, everything else outside of your expenses. So now 400 minus 250, you have 150. You have 150 left to have fun with during that month. And this is a very simple idea. So it was whatever your expenses are, whatever that is, like ideally you should have it less than 50% of whatever you make. So ideally if it would
Right.
have been $500 or less, but let's say it's just above that, it's 660%. And then 25% of what you make that out of that 1,000 goes to savings/investments. And then the remaining, you should be able to like enjoy life, right? Like go see a movie or something.
Right.
But what was the thing you mentioned earlier? I was going to address it, but I just wanted to go over this really basic math idea.
It was basically it was shoot. It was basically trying to tackle the issue that I don't tell people about my income, like something about that, like I don't tell people
Oh,
what
no,
the
no, you
number
said
is.
luck.
Luck, yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
here's my disagreement with it. Luck exists. Luck exists. Part of that luck, for example, is which family you're being born into. I mean, that's not something. There's so many examples of luck. However, with that said, it is not enough. Like you're not excused if you're gonna throw your hands up. Is like, oh, I'm just born unlucky. I'm just in an unlucky situation. With that said, you make your own luck with more time, right? There's the saying that luck is when opportunity is when preparation meets opportunity. So with that said, you might not be able to choose which family you were born into, but you were able to prepare for X luck or X opportunity to happen. You can't just be an actor and pray to God that He's going to make you an actor. Where's the preparation? Did you, like, maybe read books? Did you apply to all these potential movies, these hires? Did you do those things? If not, then like you can't just say you were going to be X without any preparation. I think we sometimes hear stories about like a waitress just being scouted, like, and this is an example for actors, but there's so many other things with it, like musicians or like certain blue collar work. It's all about taking accountability first and foremost, and then choosing that like having that preparation. But with that said, luck does exist. If your whole family has a bunch of doctors, you don't think that's not going to help you? Like maybe if you're going to become a doctor, that
not if you don't know how to utilize it. For me, like luck is kind of wasted. Like you could be born in, I would argue, you could be born into a rich family, but it won't mean jack if you don't know anything about how to manage money, if you don't know how to manage your family's empire, and if you're basically just going to waste it. So it really doesn't mean, like for me, the true benefit and the true essence of luck, like you be able to reap the rewards of it, is if, again, if you're very very prepared and you know what you're doing with it. But then again,
I,
it doesn't have to be like it's
I would
always like
agree
a
to an
given.
extent, but once again, it comes down to like you can put yourself in a lucky situation, right?
Hmm.
You, as an actor, you're an aspiring actor. I'm just going with this because that's what I said earlier.
Yeah.
But you're in the middle of nowhere. You're in, like, let's say, Nebraska or something. Like, you can, or Alaska, right? Like, you're an aspiring actor. What are you doing? And so, one of those sacrifices or preparation, like, like to be more lucky, is to go to New York or California. There's just more opportunities there. But then as you're there and maybe you don't do anything, yeah, sure. But luck does exist because there are things that you cannot control.
Mhm.
Your height, like are
Right.
people that are extraordinary, like are people that are taller luckier in terms of they want to get to the NBA, for example. It's like
Mm.
there's things that are unattributed. But with that said, I just don't want personal responsibility to go out the window. With that
Mm.
said, there are you're given a certain deck of cards, a certain hand, and then you have to play it, and like it's no one else's fault. If what
Okay.
if we start talking about faults, then you've already lost the mental game. Cause you're saying that luck does not exist at all. I just strongly disagree with that because it does happen. Families that have a mom and a dad, like those children are lucky to have them,
Okay.
like because they're
So
just
with
there's inherent benefits that one gets when they didn't work for it. There's so many examples of that. With that said, don't lay down and die. Like there needs to be an acknowledgement that it does happen though, because
okay,
then
so
I
what
think
I'm getting,
one
like,
becomes a big head with that. Yeah,
mhm.
you were saying.
No, I think like with what you're saying, I think that's a better definition for it than what I had. Is that luck does exist, and that there are circumstances when you are lucky, but it shouldn't, like from what I'm hearing you're saying, is that it shouldn't be the only factor to success, or it shouldn't be the only factor
It's not an
to
excuse.
trying to be better.
Luck
Yeah.
exists, but it's not an excuse that you're not X, Y, or Z. Luck exists. Things in this world happen without your input. You can be in a car accident. You can at the same time like have an inheritance. Like you didn't do jack to get that, or one or the other, like the car accident or the other. It's just things happen. These are like the how you say, like variables that happen that you have no control over. You can get hit by a meteor and die. It's like it happens. You can get hit. Like you can be walking down and a coconut hits you on the head and you just die. Like that's unlucky. You could have put yourself in other situations, but like that is what I consider luck. Things that are, one could see that it's really purely out of their control. And so with that acknowledgement, one should prepare as much as possible so they can meet opportunity.
What's like? Let me ask you, like, what's an example that you have, or like, what would you say? What would you say is an example of someone that you've seen that they were very, very prepared? Like they were in a very unfortunate situation, and yet they were very, very prepared when the opportunity came at them. Like at the top of that, who is the person that you're thinking of?
Oh, so somebody who's very unlucky, but then has enough preparation to overcome that unluckiness is
Right.
what you're getting at. That's a great question. So, I mean, I guess a great example for me is actually my mom. So,
Yeah.
not that like she's unlucky or like, so she practically lived in the Philippines, and she had to kind of have some context on how she grew up. She had to go dumpster diving sometimes to get food. She's the oldest of six, and so she has to take, or six or five, so that she has to take care of her siblings. Uh, Her parents always fighting, things like that. And so, how did she overcome that unlucky? And to be honest, at that time period, like she she lived in the Philippines, and so part of that is that she had to assure that like they didn't have money, and so to get to the next grade, she had to study really hard all the time so that she could be like she could have a scholarship to that next grade. And this is like from elementary school. And so that's what she had to do. Keep going, and with that preparation, she was able to get like she was able to be like the top one, top two students, and she was able to get those scholarships to get to the next level, until she got to like her university, and there she was able to get a scholarship. Without the scholarship, she wouldn't have been able to study. And so with all those, and in addition to that, right, eventually she got her family to the United States, where there's just more opportunities. So with all that unluckiness, let's say, she was able to overcome it with a lot of preparation, a lot of hard work. Being one of the best in her field, being a nurse, Filipinos, and so that helped a lot. And I mean, being a nurse was an active choice. There was a lot more like with that would open a lot more doors and opportunities. And she actually wanted to become more like a director or even a doctor, but I mean, she had to pivot due to life circumstance. And so with that, I mean, her like where I was able to grow up in a situation where there's a lot more opportunities now, all thanks to her. So I was very lucky to have a mom like that, and I didn't do jack to, have somebody like that in my life.
Like, what is her life like right now? Like,
I mean,
so
right now
you
she's doing a lot better. She's working in a hospital in Utah, and I mean, she's able to like make some pretty good money as well.
I
I
mean,
mean,
like,
she has traveled everywhere from. She has visited the 7 continents, and that's one of her dreams. And so she has already visited 7 continents, like all 7. Funny enough, the last continent was Australia and not
no
Antarctica.
way.
And so, I mean, that's the kind of person that she is. Like she has a goal and she's trying to get it. And I mean, that helps me, that like having somebody like that and having that in my ancestry helps me kind of grounds myself and helps me kind of move forward, that whatever's happening now isn't as bad as it really could have been or what it seems. Like having those ties helps me recognize like some of the difficulties that I have now. It's kind of nothing in comparison to like dumpster diving as a kid. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty jarring to what the standards are like in my situation.
I mean, like, yeah, that's the thing that people like really don't realize is that it's not impossible. I don't think like in anywhere in the world we're I don't think anyone is encouraging anyone to be rich per se, but I think we're just starting. I think with everything that we're doing, and especially with the people that I talk about, the main basic concept is to that you have enough wealth so that you're not
Oh,
really restricted by the obstacles of not having it. Like
yes,
what you said, like that she's
actually,
able to travel like whenever she
yeah.
wants to,
And
right?
I want to interject here where, and like one of the things that I'm unlucky with, as I was saying all these great things, was that my family doesn't talk about economics. Like it doesn't talk about finances. These are things that were so taboo that I didn't even know how I was gonna pay like my first few semesters. I wasn't sure like how loans worked, or it was like kind of embarrassing to even like talk about it with my family, even though like they pushed me to go like to
Wait, this was
university.
in college?
Oh no, in general, as a general thing. But
Okay,
we
yeah.
just didn't talk about money. I actually I remember this distinctly, where my mom told me to never get a credit card. But I was the one that was teaching her like as much later. It's like, wait, I think credit cards are pretty good. And as long as you use them like a debit card, you're getting a lot more value from them. And so,
Yeah, dude, I was gonna say like you were the one who kept pushing me to get a credit
oh
card. I
yeah,
was like I was very anti credit card, and then you came along and like you really don't want to get like that 1% cash back. You don't want to get
yeah,
like
at the
that three
bare
percent cash
minimum, get
back,
that. At
right?
the bare
And
minimum. And so, like, yeah, there's a whole world out there, especially this information that I learned. Funny enough, I learned it from a close friend in person, but then I was kind of suspicious, kind of not suspicious. What is it? I wasn't too sure because, like, it was my first time hearing about it. But then I watched some YouTube, and like having a better understanding into that field, like it kind of makes sense. And so there's just that thing. I think the most important thing in life to have that preparation. If you don't know the thing, you need to know how to know the thing.
hmm.
So it's okay if you don't know it, the thing that you're looking for, but you need to know how to know. Because if you don't even know the how, then how can you have the hope to improve in X, Y, or Z? If you
Like
don't
what do you
know
mean
how to
like
do
how to know? Like what do
how
you
to
mean
know.
like how to how?
So for example, um, like maybe fixing your car. That's a topic that people don't want to maybe necessarily talk about. Or if you're a guy at a certain age, maybe it's embarrassing that you don't know, or maybe for a girl, it's kind of not something they should be dealing with. But if you
Mhm.
don't like, you could, for example, ask somebody, or how do you how to fix a tire. Another way to do it is just there's things out there in the internet, YouTube.
Mhm.
That's how you can know. In accounting, I think a lot of my peers did this. We sit in class. The professor teaches us something. It's like, okay, I wrote down a lot of stuff. I don't know what I'm doing. How to know? Like, well, you might not know how to do it right now. So what you can do is ask your professor. Go to them, or there's videos out there of the same topic. I think as a general rule now, there's so many free things in the internet out there that you can know how to know. Like, um, maybe you need to fix your phone. Something happened with your phone. The camera's not working. You don't need to necessarily spend $300, 400, whatever. To like, you can get the things that you need to uh, take it out and then replace it. X, Y, and Z. You, as long as you know how to know, and in general, Google it is the idea, or YouTube it. Because if you're just at an end point and like that's it, like you just like, yeah, then you're really screwed. Because like, who else are you going to ask if you really don't know anything? You don't know how to ask in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So that skill is more important than already knowing the skill, because that skill is exponential to your growth. Like I think in finance, right? And at the same time, with that, it needs to be accompanied with common sense. Common sense being that you're able to logically think about it. And there's so many scams, there's so many things out there in the internet at the same time that is false or incorrect. And so having that ground, like that foundation of knowing if something logically makes sense, like it would help a lot. I mean, find a good example I think right now is renting or buying a house. How would you know if one or the other is better for you? At the like, you might not know. So then, how do you know? Like, how would you look for something like that? Like being able to have that skill, like you could at least look in the internet and having certain parameters and having that reading comprehension to be able to do this would greatly help. Or like maybe editing a video. Like you don't know how to edit a video. How like so what would you do to better improve that? There's so many things in the internet. Being able to utilize the internet in a safe way to get the skills that you need, or you want to work at Google or Amazon or make your own company. You don't just do
Mm-hmm.
it, right? How would you know? Like for part of it is just actually doing it as well. But what I'm getting at is essentially have the skills to be able to have that exponential growth to be able to learn.
Right. And I'm glad that you pointed that out, because there is so much stuff online. Like online is just basically a very giant library of anything that you want to learn. Like there's some, we should do an episode where we try to point out the things that we've learned. Like one of the things that I've learned is, before I was terrified of like opening a laptop. I felt like if I open a laptop, companies are like, the warranty's expired. Yeah. And like, okay, you can't do it anymore. But there was this one case where I really, really wanted to fix my laptop, and I did not have the money for a new one, basically. And I just learned online, okay, how do I do this? How do we do that?
Oh
It
yeah.
turns out, yeah. So the laptop that I had, if I had to buy a new one, is like $1,300 for the same model and the same make. But when I learned how to open it, I could just change the battery, and the battery was like $50. And so imagine the amount of money that I saved. And it was pretty effortless. And I started with replacing batteries, and then I
Mhm.
started with replacing other parts. Like for example, I was able to replace the RAM and the fans.
Mhm.
And I've gotten so good at it that I could already start to replace like the screens of a laptop. Like there was someone who gave an old laptop,
Mhm.
and the screen was basically broken, and I just basically learned how to do it online. I ordered the screen was very, very cheap. I got the laptop for free, and I was able to even get a profit out of it. So I bought the screen for like $150. I sold it for like $700, the entire laptop.
Yeah. I mean, like so with that, like that's exponential, right? Because you were just at the time you were just wanting to fix the battery, but as you became more confident and having that doing it one time helped you like branch out to be like, oh, you can do this or that, you can fix this and that, and it's pretty similar. Like it's like the first step was the hardest. So I mean, that's the same thing with cars or like with anything. Just having that growth mindset and having that growth mindset by being able to be humble enough to learn those things. And there's so much stuff that you can learn in the internet. That's why, in addition to like the United States, being in the United States with those opportunities, there's no excuse. Now with the Philippines, to be honest, there are some people that are just that are unlucky enough to be in such a circumstance where it's hopeless.
Yeah.
I mean, natural disasters, is commonplace there. Um, certain things that the government maybe should not be doing, like little things like that. But that doesn't mean also like to just lay down and die. Um,
No,
I don't
like
know.
what I said, like the Filipinos are very, very resilient. Some of like so, people keep having the mistake that there's a lot of the Philippine culture that I don't really appreciate, but then there are also those people who are very very good at what they do. I know people who started fisheries, like they don't even do much. All they do is like sell and grow fish. And they used to like start out with cleaning other people's nails and have very very minimal income from doing that, to people who have like a dedicated area for growing fish and selling it, and they live in this this huge house. Like when I looked at their house, there was like 3 stories high. They had a balcony. There was like, when you enter it, there's like 2 stairways. So, and there's people like that. There's other people who used to be drunkards and used to do nothing really. Like all they did was, before, like when they were little, all they did was they get paid for getting people into buses. Like they would encourage people, hey, take this bus instead. And then the
Oh
bus drivers
yeah,
would pay them a
we
minimum
had something
amount.
like that in Peru.
You got something like that in Peru as
Yeah,
well? Wait, what do you
yeah.
call those people? Like,
Shucks, I'm forgetting the word, but yeah, like they would just get as much people. And what's funny is the driver would then give them a portion, right, of whatever
right.
they were able
Like
to.
whatever, like it could be like
But the
it's
thing
like
is,
out of the
it's a free for all.
generosity.
It's a free for all though, where I remember there were moments like in my mission in Peru where the guide, getting people, he's too tired now, like, or he's just out, and then some random person, almost like a guest, like almost like the person just sitting there, he's like, I'll take over for a free ride or something like that, like sube, or like, yeah, get over here, and like, getting making a ruckus, I guess, to market your bus, your like, I guess, your mini bus
Yeah.
compared to everybody else. I mean, those are simpler times, and I'm sure that can still exist. I'm sure it still exists because really, essentially, you need housing and food, right? And in the Philippines, they're not as greedy like in the United States, and so there, you could live that simpler life, but that's also an opportunity cost, because then, like if you have certain ambitions, it requires some money.
Hmm.
It kind of just depends on what you want. I mean, if you really don't want anything, you just want to survive. I mean, in the Philippines, right? I'm not sure exactly how land works, but like as long as you can pay your taxes in terms of like having your house, or maybe you're not even gonna get a house. Like it really just depends. But I think the safest bet is to be able to just to have the skills to be able to survive in 30, 40 years. And retirement's also something new. Of this, it's a modern construct, so I'm not really sure how that's gonna play in with this, but yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent there.
No, yeah, I think the basic thing with Filipinos is that if you want to be like, the basic thing that I've seen that separated the people from the people who are like in really low income, like live in the slums, and the people who were able to get out of there, the only difference really was just to work hard and to have that discipline and that consistency to do it over and over again. People need to realize there is no special recipe. There is no magic formula for you to do it. The magic formula for really you to get there is to just do it over and over again, and to work harder and to be able to find these opportunities. The people that I talked about, they were people who were in very, very low income areas. They're people who you'd never think would make it so successfully in life. And then years later, here they are. Like the guy that I mentioned, like there was this one person who owns a lot of farmland, the one who would encourage people to ride in their buses or in their designated like public transportation. He had another coworker or like someone who he knew, and they met each other years later. And this guy tells me, like, you know what, before I used to work with him, like he and I had basically the same job, and now years later I own this farmland and I do all these things, and he's still doing the same job. The only thing that was really different was that he found different ways. Like he fought to survive, and he really worked hard and started to get smart with his finances. And because he was starting to get smart, he was starting to realize that there was a lot of things that he needed to change in his life. he started to seek out educational materials that
Yeah.
basically helped him.
Well, I think part of that also, like at the same time, I don't want to look down on the person who's in that same position, because like I don't know, from what I'm understanding, like that sounded like a white collar position, like they were just doing the same thing, and so that other guy could just be enjoying that kind of work, like the
No, it
normal nine
wasn't
to
white
five.
collar position. It was like the blue collar position. It's like still calling people to ride in those jeepneys and
Oh,
those
I
cabs. Like,
mean, I also don't want to look down on like blue collar workers, like in that kind of thing. I mean, he could enjoy that, right? Like the other person sure has land and is maybe farming, but what if the other person has his own ambitions, like, and he's content with that? I think there's a difference between somebody who's content with life and somebody who's like who has a lot of more stuff but with a lot more ambition. It sounds as though the other person that has the farmland has a lot of ambition. However, the other person did not. But who's really happy? Like I'm not. I think there's so much more context that needs to be found. Because materialistically, we can say that the person with the farmland is able to do X, Y, and Z, and so they should be more happy. But the other person also sounds to be living a more simple life, and there's nothing necessarily wrong about having that profession, like working in that field in that way, as long as they're able to provide. Because to me, it's equivalent to somebody just having the necessary things that they want to be able to eat and sleep, and just like, at this point, like he seems as though he's in retirement. He's just doing whatever he wants, if that is what he wants to do. Like as long as that person has opportunities and the flexibility to do what they want, it sounds like that's what he's doing. So I can't really judge him negatively for that.
yeah, that's something that I have trouble understanding still. Like, I guess for me, I'm a very ambitious person and I live for the grind and live for the work. And I really don't see myself like getting comfortable and like settling. I always see myself like there's gonna be another best thing. But like listening to myself and like listening to what you said about like stay like living the comfortable life, it reminds me like there was this story about this guy who so there was this story about this guy who basically bought a drink for other people, and this guy like he's very well off, like he drives a Lamborghini and stuff, and he has this poor person like, why is it that you're so satisfied with living here? And the poor guy basically responds like, you're paying like all these rent, you have to work to maintain your lifestyle. I basically do whatever I want, and once in a while there's like a friendly chap who buys me a drink, and that for me is satisfaction. I guess for me, like the reason I can't live off a lifestyle of that is because I know that I have a social responsibility to kind of take care of my family. Like we have this
Mm.
Filipino, like in the Philippines, like basically any everywhere. Like I have this dream where I want to be able to retire my mother. I want to make sure that she doesn't have to work another day in her life. And the sooner I get there, the better. I'm trying to save off so that when my siblings, when they do get married, I know that they're going to have some financial struggles. And I'm going to be that guy who's like, okay, what do you need? Here's how we can get it set up.
Mm.
My assistant can help you get work with the details. Like I want to be able to have that kind of a lifestyle when people need help. I won't have any financial restrictions from being able to help them in a sense. Kind of like that.
Yeah, you want to have the fiscal responsibility. Like you'll have the fiscal responsibility of taking care of your family,
Right.
which is I think a great aspiration to have, and I think a lot of people uh, have that to be able to take care of their parents, as they should. But at the same time, I'm thinking like this is like I guess the difference between the East and the West. The East has that community minded where like they want to take care of their parents, which is great, absolutely great. While the West also is more individually minded, but like having that balance, because I'm not like for siblings, I'm there for them, but like there's also a responsibility that they need to take in, for themselves as well if they want certain goals. I think for myself, in terms of ambition, like I like that idea of being able to take care of if something happens, but it is also requires like a lot of sacrifice, which, it depends. It depends on what the sacrifice is. And at this point, in like, I'm working as an accountant, and it's been pretty good. All things good. Like, I have a lot more free time than I really thought. Like, it's a lot easier than school. It's more like learning technical stuff using the internet, and so it kind of makes you think also, like, what is it that you really want to be happy? With all the money in the world, like, would the Lambo would make you feel happier? I personally think fancy cars like that is not anything I'm interested in. I think about practicality. And so I would agree with you that having that ability to help others is going to be a great feeling. And we do have a responsibility with our talents to make the world a better place. With great power comes great responsibility. And I think, like, we should try to strive to live to that, but it's also kind of hard. But with that said, I mean, I think part of that is being first. To be able to help somebody else, you need to lift yourself up to a point where you have the ability to do so. And so part of that is being wealthy.
Yeah, I think, like, if we're gonna wrap this up, like, one of the things that I think people should know, and I think we should have started off with this, is like, if you gotta know first what your level of ambition is and what comfortable looks like to you. Comfortable could look like living in the same house and just living a very, very simple life. Or maybe someone like me, comfortable, or like something that I want to achieve, some ambition that I want to achieve is so much farther. And so it really kind of depends on the person that you are. So, we have we have very different opinions of where we see ourselves in 10, 20 years. And how much work it takes to get there and how much level of happiness you get really depends on the kind of person that you are. But that's really all for me. Like, thinking back to it, like, you got to find a groove that works for you and then be willing to pay the price to have that level of comfort that you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, any last words from you, Sean?
No, I think we talked enough.
All right, well, thanks everyone. That's the pod.
Yeah, thank you.